My name is Amanda, and I am 34 years old. I work as a creative director at a small but ambitious advertising agency, and my life has been a mix of ambition, rejection, and stubborn persistence. From as early as I can remember, I loved design, colors, shapes, words that could make people feel something. While other kids played outside, I filled sketchbooks with ideas for logos, posters, and imaginary campaigns. I dreamed of creating something big enough to leave a mark on the world. But to my father, dreams were useless if they didn't pay bills. He was an accountant, practical to his core, and he valued stability above everything else. He used to look at me across the dinner table, sighing when I told him about my latest drawing and say, "Amanda, you'll never succeed with this. Art isn't a career. You need something real." Those words followed me like a shadow through my teens, through college, through every job interview where I walked in with a portfolio clutched to my chest. I grew up in a family where expectations were heavy and support was scarce. My mother, Ellen, tried to buffer the tension, but she was soft-spoken and often too weary from working double shifts as a nurse to intervene when my father's harshness cut me down. My younger brother, Chris, thrived under Dad's approval because he followed the right path: finance degree, internship at a bank, steady promotions. He was the golden child, praised at every family gathering, while I was the one with risky dreams. I remember one Thanksgiving when Chris announced his new job at an investment firm. Dad beamed with pride, slapped him on the back, and then turned to me and asked, "So, Amanda, are you still playing with crayons?" Everyone laughed. I smiled through it, but inside, I was breaking when I finally graduated with a degree in graphic design. Dad didn't even attend the ceremony. He said he was too busy with work, but I knew the truth. He couldn't bring himself to celebrate something he didn't respect. Mom tried to take pictures with me outside the auditorium, telling me she was proud, but the empty chair where Dad should have been was burned into my memory. After that, I promised myself that one day I would prove him wrong, that one day he would see me not as the failure of the family, but as someone who built something meaningful. But life after graduation wasn't glamorous. I worked unpaid internships, slept in tiny apartments with peeling paint, and took on freelance jobs designing restaurant menus and small business flyers just to make ends meet. There were nights I cried myself to sleep, wondering if Dad had been right all along, if maybe I had wasted years chasing something that was never going to pay off. Chris didn't help. He'd call me occasionally, bragging about his bonuses, then end with, "Maybe you should have listened to Dad. There's still time to get a real career." Every call felt like a knife twisting deeper. By my late 20s, though, persistence began to pay off. I landed a position at a boutique advertising agency, working under a creative director named Melissa, who saw potential in me. She gave me chances others hadn't, pushing me to lead campaigns and trusting my instincts. For the first time, I felt like I belonged. I threw myself into every project, staying late, perfecting details until my eyes burned. Slowly, my work gained recognition. A regional campaign I led for a local coffee chain won a small award, and Melissa made a point to tell everyone at the office, "Amanda has vision." I remember calling Mom that night, excited, only to hear her say softly, "That's wonderful, honey. Did you tell your father?" I didn't. I couldn't bear to hear his dismissive sigh, his reminder that awards don't pay mortgages. Then came the moment that would change everything. Our agency landed a massive account with a clothing brand expanding nationwide. It was the kind of campaign that could put our work on billboards, buses, and television screens. Melissa looked at me across the conference table and said, "Amanda, I want you to lead this one." My heart stopped. This was it, the chance I had been waiting for, the moment I could prove myself not just to Dad, but to the world. I worked day and night, obsessing over every concept, sketching drafts until my hands cramped, debating fonts and color palettes as if my life depended on it. I argued with copywriters, convinced photographers to reshoot scenes, poured my entire soul into making sure this campaign was unforgettable. But while my career was climbing, my family relationships were crumbling. Dad's health had started to decline, years of stress and a poor diet catching up with him. Mom called me one evening in tears, saying he had been hospitalized for chest pains. I rushed to the hospital, still in my blazer from work, only to have Dad glare at me from the bed and mutter, "You finally made time." I sat by his side, trying to explain my work, trying to tell him I was leading something big, but he waved his hand and said, "Amanda, you'll never succeed in that world. It's not for people like you. You should stop fooling yourself." His words crushed me, even as part of me wanted to scream that he was wrong. I left the hospital that night trembling, caught between guilt for not being there more and fury that, even in weakness, he couldn't stop belittling me. What Dad didn't know was that within weeks, my work would tower over the city itself. And soon, the man who had told me I would never succeed would have to drive past my face every time he went downtown. After that night at the hospital, I couldn't shake my father's words. They echoed in my head like a curse. "You'll never succeed. It's not for people like you." I tried to bury myself in work, convincing myself that if I made this campaign perfect, it would finally silence those doubts that had followed me for years. Every morning, I arrived at the agency before anyone else, pouring coffee into my system and spreading design boards across my desk. My colleagues joked that I practically lived there, and maybe I did. But I wasn't just chasing a campaign. I was chasing validation, something my own family had refused me for decades. Melissa, my creative director, pushed me hard but believed in me even harder. "Amanda, don't second-guess yourself," she'd say as we reviewed layouts late into the night. "You see things most people overlook. Trust that instinct." Her encouragement became my fuel. For once, someone in authority looked at me not as a failure, not as a dreamer, but as someone capable of leading. I clung to that belief like a lifeline. Still, when I went home to my one-bedroom apartment, silence greeted me. The walls felt tighter, the air heavier. My phone buzzed with texts from Chris, who kept reminding me that Dad was disappointed I hadn't been around more. His words dripped with judgment. "Some of us actually prioritize family over work." I wanted to scream back that I was doing this for the family, that one day my success would prove Dad wrong and make them proud. But I stayed silent, biting my tongue as I always did. As weeks passed, the campaign grew into something bigger than I ever imagined. We hired models, coordinated massive photo shoots, and worked with city officials to reserve prime advertising spots. The brand wanted visibility in the heart of downtown, and that meant billboards, the kind that loomed above traffic, impossible to ignore. When Melissa told me my face would be part of the final ad series, I thought she was joking. "We need relatability," she explained. "Real faces, not just models. You have the look, Amanda, approachable, confident, professional. People will connect with you." My heart skipped a beat. It wasn't just my design anymore, it was me. My face would be up there, representing the work I had poured everything into, but while my career soared, my family seemed determined to drag me down. When I visited home one weekend, Dad barely acknowledged me. He sat in his armchair, flipping through financial newspapers, while Mom fussed in the kitchen. Chris cornered me in the hallway and whispered, "Stop bragging about your job. You're stressing Dad out. He doesn't need to hear about your little projects." My fists clenched. Little projects. If only he knew. But I swallowed the anger, smiled weakly, and let it slide. That was my role in the family: silence, endurance, invisibility. The turning point came one late evening at the office. I was sitting with Melissa and a few team members, finalizing the billboard design. The photographer had captured me leaning casually against a railing, sunlight highlighting my face just enough to feel natural. Next to me was the brand's logo, bold and striking, with the tagline I had written myself. When they projected the mock-up on the big screen, everyone clapped. Melissa turned to me with a grin. "Amanda, this is it. This is the one. Tomorrow, we send it to print." I smiled, but tears stung my eyes. For the first time, I saw proof that I wasn't just chasing shadows. My work, my image, my vision, it was real, and it was about to tower over the city. That night, I drove past the downtown district where the billboard would soon rise. The scaffolding was already in place, the frame looming like a promise against the skyline. I sat in my car staring at it, whispering to myself, "Dad will have to see this. He'll have no choice." For once, I wasn't afraid of his judgment. For once, I felt ready to face him. But life has a way of testing you even in your highest moments. The next morning, Mom called me in tears. Dad's condition had worsened, and he was back in the hospital. My chest tightened as I raced there, still dressed in the outfit I'd worn for the office presentation. When I arrived, Chris was already there, arms crossed, glaring at me. "Nice of you to finally show up," he muttered. Dad lay in bed, pale and weak, but his voice still carried that familiar edge. "Amanda, what are you doing with your life? You're wasting it. You'll never succeed in that world." His words cut deeper than any scalpel. I wanted to tell him that tomorrow, my face would be on a billboard. That tomorrow, he'd see me succeed in a way he never thought possible. But instead, I just sat there, holding his hand, swallowing the fire inside me, because I knew the moment was coming. And when it did, there would be no denying me anymore. The morning the billboard went up, I barely slept. My alarm rang at 5, but I was already awake, my heart pounding with anticipation. I got dressed carefully, as if I were preparing for the most important day of my life. At the agency, the team buzzed with energy. Melissa hugged me when I walked in and said, "Come on, we're going downtown. You need to see this with your own eyes." We piled into cars and drove toward the heart of the city, where cranes were already lifting the massive canvas into place. I craned my neck as the sheet unfurled, and there it was, my design, my slogan, my face, towering above traffic on a billboard that stretched across the skyline. I gasped, tears spilling down my cheeks. The city that once made me feel so small was now looking up at me. The team cheered, snapping photos, posting online, tagging the agency. Melissa squeezed my shoulder and whispered, "This is only the beginning." For a moment, I let myself feel it. Pride, validation, the sense that maybe I had finally done it. But in the back of my mind, there was only one thought. Dad has to see this. Sure enough, by the afternoon, my phone buzzed with a call from Mom. Her voice was strained. "Amanda, your father saw the billboard." My breath caught. "And?" I asked. A long pause, then she sighed. "He's furious. He says you humiliated him. He says you're flaunting yourself like some cheap advertisement." My knees went weak. I leaned against my office desk, gripping the edge. "Mom, this is my work. This is what I've been fighting for my whole life." Her voice softened. "I know, sweetheart. I'm proud of you. But you know how he is. He doesn't understand." That evening, I drove to my parents' house, my stomach in knots. When I walked in, Dad was sitting in his chair, arms crossed, jaw clenched. Chris stood beside him, smirking like he had been waiting for this. "So," Dad said coldly, "you've turned yourself into a spectacle." I bit my lip, trembling. "Dad, it's not about me showing off. It's about my work, my career. That billboard is proof that I made it." He shook his head. "Made it? By plastering your face in the street like some desperate actress? That's not success, Amanda. That's embarrassment." The anger that had simmered in me for years boiled over. "Embarrassment," I shouted. "Do you have any idea how hard I worked? While Chris had you cheering at every promotion, I was struggling to survive, taking odd jobs, fighting for recognition, sacrificing sleep and comfort. And now, after years of pushing myself, I finally achieved something incredible, and you call it humiliation." My voice cracked, but I pressed on. "You've never supported me, not once. Not at my graduation, not in my career. You've done nothing but tell me I'd fail. And now that I've proven you wrong, you still can't admit it." Chris jumped in, his tone dripping with condescension. "Amanda, calm down. Dad just wants what's best for you. You don't have to be so dramatic." I snapped my head toward him. "Dramatic? Easy for you to say, Chris. You've had his approval since day one. You've never had to fight for a scrap of recognition. You have no idea what it's like to be treated as a failure in your own family." His smirk faded, replaced with a scowl. "Maybe if you weren't so self-centered, you'd realize why Dad doesn't take you seriously." The room erupted in shouting, Dad accusing me of dishonoring the family, Chris sneering that I only cared about fame, me screaming that all I ever wanted was respect. Mom stood in the kitchen doorway, tears streaming down her face, begging us to stop. But none of us listened. Years of resentment, bitterness, and unspoken pain exploded in that living room like a bomb. Finally, I grabbed my coat, my chest heaving. I looked at Dad, my voice shaking with fury and heartbreak. "You said I'd never succeed. Well, the entire city sees me every day now. Whether you admit it or not, I've proven you wrong." Without waiting for his reply, I stormed out, slamming the door behind me. I sat in my car afterward, sobbing uncontrollably, shaking with rage and grief. I had imagined this moment so many times, my father seeing my success, finally acknowledging me. But instead of pride, he gave me shame. Instead of respect, he gave me rejection all over again. And as much as it shattered me, a part of me realized something I had been too afraid to admit. Maybe no billboard, no achievement, no success would ever be enough to change the way he saw me. The days following that confrontation were some of the hardest in my life. I had expected tension, maybe even anger, but what I didn't expect was the silence. My father refused to answer my calls, my texts went unanswered, and when I tried to stop by the house, my mother met me at the door, her eyes full of sorrow. "Amanda," she whispered, blocking the entrance, "your father doesn't want to see you right now. He feels disrespected." Her words stung more than any insult. I wanted to scream that I had spent my entire life trying to earn his respect, that everything I had done, every sleepless night, every sacrifice, was for this very moment. But instead, I just nodded, my throat too tight to speak, and walked away, to the office. Things couldn't have been more different. The campaign exploded with success. Photos of the billboard were all over social media. Clients called with new opportunities, and our agency's name began to circulate in circles it had never reached before. Melissa congratulated me daily, proudly introducing me as the face of our campaign. Yet while everyone else celebrated, I felt hollow. What was the point of success if the people who mattered most couldn't see it for what it was? Every time someone congratulated me, I heard Dad's voice in the back of my mind. "It's not success, it's embarrassment. Chris didn't make things easier." One afternoon, he called me from Dad's phone, his tone sharp. "Amanda, stop parading that billboard around like it's some great achievement. You're making Dad sick. He doesn't need the stress of seeing your face everywhere." My grip tightened around the phone. "I didn't put it there to spite him, Chris. It's my work. This is my career."
He scoffed.
"Your career is humiliating our family. Maybe that's why Dad never took you seriously." I hung up before I could say something I'd regret, but my hands trembled with rage. The real breaking point came when I attended a family dinner at my parents' house a week later. I had debated going, but Mom begged me, saying Dad needed us all together. I arrived with cautious hope, dressed neatly, bringing a bottle of wine as a peace offering. But from the moment I walked in, the atmosphere was suffocating. Dad barely looked at me, and when he did, his eyes were cold. Emily, my cousin, who had been invited, made a snide comment across the table. "So, Amanda, how does it feel to be a giant poster girl? Do strangers ask for your autograph now?" The laughter that followed from a few relatives cut deep. I tried to hold my composure, but my hands shook as I set down my fork. Finally, I couldn't hold back anymore. I looked straight at Dad and said, "Why is it so hard for you to just say you're proud of me?" The table went quiet. Dad set down his glass slowly and stared at me. "Because pride is earned by integrity, Amanda, not by plastering your face on a wall." His words sliced through me. I leaned forward, my voice trembling but strong. "Integrity? I've worked harder than anyone in this room. I didn't take shortcuts. I didn't live off your approval like Chris. I fought for every inch of recognition I have. That billboard isn't shame, it's proof that I made it." Chris slammed his hand on the table. "Enough, Amanda. You don't get it. Dad doesn't care about your so-called achievements. You've embarrassed him, and you're too selfish to even see it." The argument erupted, voices clashing, plates clattering. My mother begged us to stop, but the years of resentment, jealousy, and judgment came pouring out. Dad finally stood, his face red with fury. You will never understand, Amanda. Success isn't about your face on a billboard. It's about family, about values. And you've forgotten both. His words crushed me in a way nothing else ever had. I left the house that night with tears streaming down my face, my chest aching as if something inside me had shattered beyond repair. For years, I had told myself that if I could just achieve something big enough, Dad would see me, would finally believe in me. But standing in that driveway, staring up at the dark sky, I realized the heartbreaking truth. No success, no billboard, no career would ever be enough to change the way he saw me. To him, I would always be the daughter who chose the wrong path, no matter how high I climbed. And yet, as much as it broke me, a small spark of defiance burned inside. If I couldn't earn his pride, then I would create my own. If he refused to see me, then the world would. The fallout from that dinner carried into every corner of my life. My family stopped speaking to me almost entirely. Mom sent the occasional text, short, cautious messages asking how I was eating or sleeping, but they were always followed by reminders that your father is still upset, or please try not to provoke him. It felt like she was torn in two, trapped between protecting me and keeping peace with him. Chris, on the other hand, didn't hold back. He flooded my phone with passive-aggressive comments. You've divided this family. You've made Dad's health worse. Do you even care? Each word stabbed deeper, fueling the guilt I was already drowning in. Meanwhile, at work, I was being celebrated. The campaign was considered a breakthrough, and new clients poured in because of it. My face was everywhere, on buses, on billboards, even in magazines. Strangers smiled at me in coffee shops, recognizing me from the ad, while my colleagues praised me as the rising star of the agency. Melissa even pulled me aside and said, Amanda, you're the reason we're being noticed at a national level. You should be proud. And I was proud, at least professionally. But personally, I was unraveling. Every time I drove past the billboard, I didn't just see success. I saw my father's face, grim and disappointed, telling me again and again that it wasn't enough. One night, Chris showed up unannounced to my apartment. He didn't even knock, he buzzed until I let him in. He stormed inside, his expression furious. Do you even realize what you're doing to Dad? He shouted. He's ashamed, Amanda. Every time he goes downtown, he has to see your face staring back at him like some mockery. He can't handle it. My hands shook as I tried to stay calm. Chris, it's not about mocking him. It's my work. This is my career. He sneered. No, this is your ego. You've always been desperate for attention, and now you've got it, at the expense of this family. His words pierced me, but anger surged stronger than pain. At the expense of this family? I snapped. Do you have any idea how much I've sacrificed? How many years I've fought without anyone believing in me? While you had Dad cheering you on, I was the punchline of every joke. I didn't do this for attention, Chris. I did it because I refused to let him be right about me. The fight escalated until he slammed the door on his way out, leaving me shaking and sobbing in my own living room. I collapsed on the couch, my head in my hands, wondering how it had come to this. I had always imagined that success would heal the rift, that proving myself would bridge the gap between us. Instead, the higher I climbed, the deeper the chasm grew. A week later, Mom called again, her voice low and hesitant. Your father's been talking about rewriting his will, she said. My stomach dropped. What do you mean? I asked. She hesitated before whispering. He says if you care more about your career than family, then maybe you don't need anything from us. My chest tightened. It wasn't about money. I didn't need his inheritance. But the thought that he would cut me out formally, permanently, as if I didn't exist, it shattered me. Mom, please, I begged, my voice breaking. I'm still his daughter. Doesn't that matter? She sighed heavily. It should. But he's stubborn, Amanda. You know that. At the agency, I plastered on a smile, guiding presentations, shaking hands with clients, acting like everything was perfect. But inside, I was breaking. I went home each night to silence, staring at the city lights through my window, wondering how something I had worked so hard for could destroy me so deeply. I had won professionally, but at what cost? The cruelest moment came unexpectedly. Driving home one evening, I stopped at a red light right beneath my billboard. A car pulled up beside me, and inside was my father. Our eyes met through the glass, just for a split second. His face was a mask of stone, unreadable, and then he looked away, driving off without acknowledgement. My chest ached so badly, I thought I might collapse right there behind the wheel. That was when I realized something painful but true. Maybe no billboard, no award, no campaign would ever make him see me differently. Maybe I was fighting for a kind of love and recognition that simply didn't exist in him, and yet, even as my heart broke, I knew I couldn't stop. I couldn't shrink myself down to please him anymore. The billboard wasn't just about proving him wrong, it was about proving to myself that I could rise, even without his approval. The weeks that followed were some of the most transformative of my life. After the painful encounter at the red light, I stopped waiting for my father's approval. Something inside me shifted that night. I realized I had been fighting for a kind of recognition he would never give, and the more I chased it, the more power I gave him to wound me. So I made a decision. If my father couldn't be proud of me, then I would be proud of myself. It wasn't easy, but it was the only way I could survive. Work opportunities multiplied. A national magazine reached out for an interview about the campaign. The journalist asked me about my journey, my struggles, my rise in a competitive industry. I answered honestly, talking about rejection, about years of unpaid work, about pushing through when everyone, including my own family, doubted me. The article was published with the headline, "From Underdog to Downtown Billboard, Amanda's Story of Persistence." It went viral in our field, cementing me not only as a face but as a voice of resilience. My agency basked in the spotlight, and Melissa beamed with pride every time my name was mentioned. But with every success came a deeper silence from home. Chris refused to speak to me at all. The last time we had exchanged words was that shouting match in my apartment. Mom kept calling occasionally, her voice tired, always caught in the middle. "Amanda, I wish your father could see what I see. But he's too stubborn. He feels like you chose the world over the family." Those words hurt, but I no longer argued. I just whispered back, "Maybe he'll never understand, Mom. But I can't keep breaking myself to make him happy." She would sigh, and the conversation would end in that same unresolved ache point. One evening, after a long day at the office, I was invited to speak at a local university's design program. Standing in front of those students, I saw myself reflected back, wide-eyed dreamers with sketchbooks in their hands, hungry for validation. I told them what I wish someone had told me years ago, that success doesn't come from chasing approval, but from believing in your work when no one else does. When the applause filled the room, I felt something shift. For the first time, the hole left by my father's rejection didn't feel quite so empty, but life has a way of testing conviction. Not long after, Mom called late at night, her voice trembling. "Amanda, your father collapsed. He's in the hospital again." My heart dropped. I rushed there immediately, only to find Chris already pacing the hallway, his arms crossed, his expression hard. When he saw me, he snapped, "Why are you here? You've done enough damage." His words stung, but I pushed past him and went into Dad's room. He looked fragile, smaller than I had ever seen him. Tubes lined his arms, machines beeped steadily, and for a moment, I was just a daughter again. Not the billboard face, not the disappointment, just his child. I took his hand gently, whispering, "Dad, I'm here." His eyes opened slowly, and for the first time, I saw something different, not anger, but exhaustion. He didn't speak much, just muttered, "You always had to do things your way." Tears filled my eyes as I whispered back, "Yes, because it was the only way I knew how to survive." His hand squeezed mine faintly, but he closed his eyes again, too weak to argue, that I left the hospital that night torn in half. Part of me still longed for his approval, but another part knew that I couldn't build my life on waiting for it anymore. The city outside the hospital window was alive with lights, and among them, my billboard still shone brightly. It was a painful contrast. My success glowing above, my family fractured below. As I drove home, I realized that I had a choice. I could continue to let my father's disapproval define me, or I could define myself. And for the first time in my life, I chose the latter. The final chapter of this story doesn't come with fireworks or dramatic reconciliation. It comes with a quiet realization that changed me forever. My father never stood in front of that billboard with pride in his eyes. He never called me to say he was sorry for doubting me. He never gave me the words I had craved my entire life. But what I finally understood was that his inability to see my success had nothing to do with me and everything to do with him. He was a man shaped by fear, by rigid beliefs, by a world where security was measured in stable jobs and predictable outcomes. My path terrified him because it was unfamiliar, and instead of admitting that, he dismissed it. For years, I mistook his fear for truth, and it almost broke me. When he eventually passed away months later, the funeral was heavy with silence between me and my brother. Chris barely looked at me, and Mom, caught in her own grief, could hardly speak. As I stood there, surrounded by mourners, I felt an emptiness I can't quite describe. I had wanted so badly to hear him say, just once, "I'm proud of you." But those words never came. And yet, when I drove home that evening and glanced up at the billboard, still standing tall above the city, I realized I didn't need them anymore. The world had already spoken. My clients, my colleagues, the students I mentored, the strangers who smiled at me in cafes, they saw me.
I saw me.
That was enough. The irony of it all was that the very thing Dad mocked me for, the dream he said would never lead anywhere, was the thing that built me into the woman I am today. A woman who refused to shrink, who refused to surrender, who stood in the face of doubt and kept moving forward. I am not defined by his words anymore. I am defined by the choices I made, the work I created, the persistence that carried me through years of rejection. And maybe that's the lesson hidden in all this. Sometimes the validation you seek will never come from the people you want it from most. Sometimes you have to stop waiting for permission and learn to validate yourself. If you're listening to this, maybe you've been told you'll never succeed. Maybe you've been laughed at, doubted, dismissed by people who should have supported you. And maybe you're still carrying that weight the way I carried mine for so long. If that's you, hear me when I say this. Your worth is not determined by their approval. Your dreams are not foolish just because someone else doesn't understand them. You don't have to prove them wrong. You only have to prove to yourself that you can keep going. And as I close this story, I want to thank you from the bottom of my heart for listening until the end. Sharing this part of my life hasn't been easy, but maybe in my words you found a piece of your own strength. If you did, I'd love for you to subscribe and leave a like. It helps me continue sharing stories like this, stories that remind us we're not alone in our struggles. And who knows? Maybe one day, your story will be the one inspiring someone else, shining bright like a billboard in the middle of their darkest doubts.